for all you mountain timers, thanks for being here. It means a lot. We love
They-
you especially.
They do get mountain views, so it balances out, and the mountains are beautiful. Let's start on that note. Thank you for joining us today.
That's
and
good.
the way in which your institution talks to students goes a long way toward determining whether or not they'll go to your institution. And that conversation is not a one-way street. You have to listen to students too. And the institutions that actually take feedback from students are going to do a better job at engaging them and making a good first impression. So we're going to have a conversation about conversations. It's conversation inception. Thanks for joining me.
It's very meta.
Yes, it is. Inside. I'm Greg Bauch. I'm a writer and conversational marketing specialist here at Mongoose. I'm joined by Zach Busekrus, who is the founder of Enrollify and the director of growth at DD Agency. Zach, how are you today?
I'm doing excellent, Greg. It is sunny and it's like 70 or 69, 70 degrees right now in DC. So I really can't complain. I'm on my probably fourth cup of coffee. So if I start shaking, that's why. I'm not having any sort of, medical issue, but I'm doing fantastic. So thanks for having me on, and I'm excited to chat and share some stories and insight and anything else I can do to be helpful.
Good. And I know everyone's here for you, but just in case they're not, tell us a little bit about yourself.
A little bit about myself. So
and Enrollify in general, but yeah.
And Enrollify, yeah, that's the only thing people really care about. I started Enrollify about 2.5 years ago now, and Enrollify is a community of folks who work in higher ed marketing, either as a practitioner, working as a director of marketing or director of enrollment, VP of enrollment management at the college and university, or folks that work in roles like Greg and I work in and support those people that work in higher ed marketing. And we're a place where people come to consume lots of content. We've got 6 podcasts and counting, lots of videos and blog articles as well, e-courses, guides, you name it. We're really just trying to build a digital association for people that work in and around higher ed marketing. So that's a little bit about Enrollify. And I spend a lot of my time helping colleges and universities think about how to recruit next generations of students. Spend a lot of time thinking about SEO and what works and what doesn't when it comes to organic strategies for colleges and universities. And then when I'm not doing that in the context of higher education, I am working on my little side gig, my little side hustle, which is called Spontaneous. And it's a new weekly newsletter that brings folks the best last minute deals and upcoming deals on Airbnb. So that's what I do offline and on the weekends. But excited to be here and chatting with you all. I love marketing. I love Mongoose. I love everything that they're about. So this is a real treat. And while I spend probably like 3 or 4 hours a week interviewing people for like our podcast and whatnot, I rarely get interviewed like myself. So this is a real treat, Greg. And I'm a little nervous, being on the other side of the table here. It's not quite the same. So don't be too hard on me.
This is going to be hard hitting.
I'm shaking. I'm shaking in my boots.
No, it's a good segue. Everything that you do is a good segue into how we're going to get started here. And it won't be the only experience we draw upon, but recently you and your Enrollify team hit the road and went to talks with students, which is just a great way to get insight. And you ask them, what they're thinking when they choose an institution, and like, that's great. So I want to talk about that and how that came about. But first off, what did you expect to hear going into that conversation with students?
Yeah, well, I guess I would start by saying that again, as I mentioned just a second ago, I get to spend a lot of time talking to brilliant thinkers who are working inside of colleges and universities and are working for ed tech companies or education marketing services agencies that know a lot about what it takes to recruit students today. And, these are folks that are actively involved in either admissions or marketing at a college or university, and or again, supporting their clients and helping enroll new students. And what's really interesting is you learn a lot. Like I basically spend most of my week just learning from people that are way smarter than me about things that sometimes I have to Google, like while we're talking, ooh, what does this acronym mean? Or what does this word mean? It's a lot of fun. But oftentimes, right, when it comes to student recruitment and higher ed marketing, we don't talk enough to students themselves, right? Like I was on a podcast recently with a VP of enrollment management at a very well-known public institution, and they were ranting on somebody from their Marcom department that wanted to invest in TikTok, wanted to spend more budget on TikTok, and the VP says, "Oh gosh, Zach, like it's just so annoying. I just keep getting asked about TikTok, and what do you think?" And I asked this person, I said, when's the last time you talked to a student about where they spend their time on social media? And it was like this full stop moment. And I share that only because sometimes as leaders or people that are supporting people in this space, we forget that at the end of the day, our consumer, the customer that we're focused on, is a 16, 17, 18-year-old if you're going after a traditional undergrad student. And so the impetus for this roadshow was really actually to spend some time canvassing, and we had some scheduled interviews, but a lot of it was we went to colleges and universities around New England and just walked onto campus and started asking students questions about how they thought about higher education, how they thought about their college admissions process, what their college search process looked like. And it was incredibly revealing. So what I sort of thought, I guess, going in to answer your question a little bit more directly was, I thought I hear a lot of, oh, well, I chose this school because it's ranked well for X or ranked well for Y. I thought I would hear some folks say, oh, well, they've got a great football team, or, oh yeah, their, dorms are really great. Or, oh, I really came here because of this one individual program. But what I learned, and we will dive into this, was that students were way more intentional about how they thought about higher education than I feel like even I was, not too long ago. And so the intentionality with which students are approaching the decision around if, when, and strong emphasis on if and when and where to go to school, I feel like has just increased dramatically in very, very recent years.
Yeah, I never even thought about the if. It was just, I'm going to go to college. Is the Army or college? And and this was before the internet, just to date myself with that. So it is interesting. And I would think that one of the biggest answers would be, because, if you don't talk to students every day, you don't know this, is just majors, cost, and that's maybe location, but that's it.
Yeah. And, the cost thing was especially interesting to me, because I think that gets thrown around a lot. And you hear people talk about like Gen Z are more cost sensitive, more price sensitive when it comes to considering college. And generally, like the students we talked to on this roadshow, that was generally true. But what was more true was the fact that students were really, really interested in what I would call, they didn't use this word in particular, but what I would sort of categorize as like short-term ROI. So what students were more interested in doing was like trying to figure out how quickly will the investment at this college or university that I'm paying for tuition, how quickly will I be able to make up that money and then some? So it was less about like sticker price of $70K versus a $30K versus a $15K, tuition option, and more so, okay, if I do invest the $70K, how quickly am I going to be able to like pay that off and or be in a position, not just like an entry-level position, but like a position that is credible in the field where I at least have a chance of significantly, paying my debt off over the course of a few years, as opposed to a couple of decades. So I think that that's the one asterisk that I would put whenever we talk about sort of like students' perceptions around cost of college. I actually think it's less about the sticker price, and it is much more and less about like long-term ROI. And right now, it's a little bit more about, okay, how quickly might I be able to pay this off? And when I do, where am I at? Like, what kind of role am I in? Am I in a leadership role? What kind of company am I in, et cetera? So I think that that's just an important sort of like nuance to remember as we talk about, the sticker price of college.
And the viewers here won't realize I'm jumping around, but I'm jumping around on Zach because that leads into a really great insight you got from a student on this journey that I just loved. And it was just the anecdotal story of the school allowing alumni or, recruiting alumni to talk to students about their majors. So if you are in rad tech, you talk to someone who graduated in the program from that school, what could they expect throughout their journey in school? What kind of job did they get? You can answer those questions. How long did it take you to, graduate and then pay for school? Like that, if you get that from an actual alumni and you can make those alumni available, that's something you can do that carries through the entire life cycle of benefit. It's a benefit for enrollment. It's a benefit for retention. It's a benefit even in advancement. Like that if you can have that happen, that's an incredibly valuable thing.
Yeah, no, 100%. And that was also, a really interesting insight. Was like, they asked the admissions team that they were talking with, hey, can I have some contact information of alumni from this program? And the initial people, the way that the student told the story was that the initial names that they got were from folks who were like 10, 15 years out, right? Because again, they phrased it as like, I want to understand sort of like the return on investment of going to your school and studying this particular program at your school. And so the admissions team first gave folks that were like 10 to 15 years out. The student goes back and says, hey, thank you for that. Do you have anyone that you could put me in touch with that's like 3 years out or 4 or 5 years out? And they did. And what the student said, which was just super interesting, was like, during the college search process, especially if you are a institution that does have a more expensive sticker price, find a way. And again, I think that what's so hard about this is it varies so dramatically, and there's so many factors here. But like, if there is a way for you to connect even just a handful of your alumni who are 2, 3, 4 years out with your prospective students who studied similar things, and say, look, the expectation isn't that these folks, have totally paid off their college debt by this particular, by 2, 3 years out, but like at least being able to talk to prospects and say, here's the trajectory that I'm on, right? Like, here's what I did immediately the first year after, second year after, third year after, here's where I'm at, here's my job title, this is the kind of field that I work in, this is, my employer, and here's where I plan to be over the next couple of years. That insight, all right, that's short-term ROI. And I really do think, especially for students who are more cost conscious, like the schools that can figure out how to make that connection happen are the schools that are going to win in sort of the admissions process. Because again, you're delivering context that like isn't as valuable coming from you as the director of admissions, right? Or like an admissions counselor. People want to hear from the students. That's not new. We all know that. And people also want to hear from alumni, right? And that's not new, and we know that. But I think the difference here is hearing from alumni specifically about questions related to costs, and specifically about cost and ROI in the shorter term as opposed to the longer term.
That segues again into honesty, authenticity, and a word I'm going to use, and it's called brand. And no, I'm not going to put on backward sunglasses and a visor, but because it does relate to higher ed, your school, whether you like it or not, does have a brand. I want to say real quick, if at any point in time during this webinar you have a question, please hit the Q&A button on the bottom and swing it to Zach and I, and we'd be happy to answer that. We're going without a net. No slide deck in our webinar, which is great.
No slide deck.
That's right. So if we say something and you missed it, get a hold of us and let us know. We'll expound on anything you'd like to expound about. But back to brand. I mean, it's the voice of your school, authenticity. You said that, you get that honest insight from an alumni member, but that should be throughout every single department. And it's really important to students because they deal with brands every day, and they are so used to being catered to, and your school really has to adapt to that.
Yeah. I mean, and one of the things that was surprising to me, so again, just to paint the picture for folks as well, we hit up 6 different schools over the course of 4 days. Sample size is relatively small. We were in New England, right? Sort of like the mecca of colleges and universities. And we did it, in addition to actually visiting schools, we did a lot of just canvassing. Literally, like, we were in downtown Boston. I got a sign, and I wrote like, hey, I want to talk to you. If you're a student, I want to talk to you about the future of higher education. And I gave people like $5 Starbucks gift cards as a thank you for talking to me, right? Like, so we were doing tons and tons of canvassing in addition to some more strategic campus visits. And one of the things that was shocking to me, and maybe it shouldn't have been so shocking, but it was to me, was that 50% of students flat out said that the reason they chose the college or university that they chose was because of the brand. And it was actually shocking to me in terms of like, I was expecting that to be that number to be less than 50%, maybe even significantly less than 50%, especially because everyone talks about how, oh, Gen Z is much more intentional about like where they want to go to school. They're much more thoughtful around sort of, the cost of college, and therefore like they might end up at, a smaller, they might not have the same impression or, bias around thinking about the ROI of a smaller liberal arts school as they might a large sort of like R1 institution that those of us in the past might have had, right? But what was interesting is that 50% just flat out said it was the brand, like the name of the school, or brand also just being like the reputation of a specific program that ultimately convinced me to go there. But what that also means, I think, for those of us on today's webinar is like if you don't have a name brand institution, right? Like if you don't have an institution that it has incredible brand around one specific program or even sort of a collection of programs, from our data, right? Like 50% of Gen Z will still consider you, right? Like because brand actually isn't everything. Even though it is significantly influential. So I hate like 50% stats because it's like, oh, well, what am I supposed to do with that? But I do think it's representative of the fact that while brand is increasingly important, there's still a decent percentage of the market that brand isn't the most influential thing in their decision-making process.
For that 50% though, I think that's good news because brand is kind of the great equalizer. Like you don't have time and you don't have a big budget. Every viewer to this webinar has those two big obstacles in their job.
Yep.
But you don't need a budget to, improve the way you talk to students, improve, the way that, the way in which they perceive your school. And, time and money are always a problem, but just how you speak to students and what your brand is goes a long way. What is something a school can do like today to improve their brand? Because obviously that sounds like a huge overhaul when you use that word brand, but there are specific things you can do today to improve your school.
Yeah. So, one of my favorite exercises when I'm talking with a school about like their brand, or they say, hey, we need a rebrand, or we need like, a brand refresh is sort of like what the kids say these days, because it sounds like it's less work than total, rebrand. Oftentimes it ends up being just as much work. But schools, if you want to understand kind of like who you're competing with, just go and like read the hero text on like 10 random college and university websites, and like odds are the hero text, like that big like banner text that greets you on their homepage, it's gonna be all but identical. Like schools do really, really, really struggle with articulating their unique value proposition in short, concise, and compelling ways. Like I'd say that's like true for most schools. And you see language, right? Like at grad schools, for example, or grad programs, their favorite word is like advance, or like advance your career, or discover new possibilities here, or whatever it might be. And the reality is like that's what everyone says, and maybe it is mostly true at your school. Maybe it's truer at your school than the competitor school down the street. But like your average prospect who is like doing a bunch of internet research to decide what forms they're going to fill out on your website and whether or not they're going to come to one of your program information sessions or open houses, they don't know that. You might be right and your competitor might be wrong, but prospects don't know that. They're reading the same copy on a similar looking website, right? So what I like to say to folks, especially folks who are understaffed, under-resourced, they're a smaller school, they really, really need to grow enrollment, find a way to obsess over niche marketing positioning. So, right, for example, if you have a excellent business analytics program, a business analytics major, and you've got like a new faculty member and they're state of the art and they're doing a ton of really, really interesting research, and they've got a little bit of a brand around them, a little bit of a following, find a way when you're marketing that particular major, that particular program, to be just more specific. Like, we have the most incredible business analytics program in, Eastern Washington or something like that, right? Geo is one way to sort of qualify this, but it's not the only way. Think about like being really, really, really critical in how you qualify what you're great at. And I actually think that, like, well, that sounds a little scary and you wonder, oh, like, okay, well, it's the greatest in Eastern Washington. What about Western Washington, right? Or what about Northern Washington? And so you do with that what you will. But my point is that schools stick in like broad land, and they really, really need to start living into niche land. And I actually think from a search, this is not just a branding, this is not just for brand, it's also from a search perspective, right? So like as students, right? Students begin their college search on Google. Like that's how it works, right? And as students are typing words and queries into Google, if you do have longer term branding, right? If you've strategically positioned some of your program pages to include geo-specific words or just niche specific terms to describe the program, the odds of you winning on sort of a longer tail keyword search go up dramatically, right? So this has implications not just for your brand and not just for being able to sort of stand behind a very clear descriptive UVP, but also it can dramatically help you boost your organic rankings around key terms and topics that are relevant to your school. So niche marketing, niche positioning, I think is incredibly important. I also think that COVID taught us all this, but like your website is your institution's second, I would say, second most important asset. First important asset is your campus. I would argue that your website, from a prospect standpoint, is your second most important asset. I think it comes before your faculty, it comes before your people, it even comes before your students. Meaning, right, from a prospect's perspective, like when they're interacting with your brand, if you've got a matter of seconds to tell them a story or communicate an idea, at least an idea that's compelling enough to get them to convert, right, and give some information about themselves to you for, your website has to be incredibly clear. It's got to be incredibly dynamic. It's got to be incredibly user-friendly. It really needs to be the digital expression of the culture that is present on your institution's campus. And so I would argue that schools spend way too much time and energy thinking about how to get people to their website and not nearly enough amount of time, budget, energy, effort in thinking, what the heck are we going to do with them now that they're here? And that is problematic. And I think that is something that folks need to spend a little bit more time thinking about.
Not to mention your homepage, students often will not just type in mongooseuniversity.com and get to that homepage. So make sure that your program pages are loaded and ready to go to welcome people. And also you mentioned storytelling. Storytelling is a great way to put things into perspective and, tell a story about your institution. Those are usually super engaging. Question came in from Dylan. I appreciate the question. And Zach may have even answered it. Works in admissions in a small Christian college in Boston, 3 years old. The brand's not well established, e.g. they have no graduates yet. Any advice on what strong points we can play on when marketing to prospective students with our brand limitations? I think a lot of what you said about niche would answer that question.
Yeah, and what I would just add on to that is when it comes to positioning, I think what's really important, and this is a little bit cliche, like asking your students, like sitting down with your students, right, and giving them a list of adjectives that they're not allowed to use to describe your school and your culture, your offerings, right? Like
that's like the board game, list, like the board game Taboo, right?
Exactly. Like play Taboo with your students. Say, look, you're not allowed to say small. You're not allowed to say Christian. You're not, or whatever, like the stereotypical quick first adjectives people use to describe your school, describe your program. Come up with a list of 5 to 10. Sit down with some students and say, okay, you're not allowed to use these words to describe your experience here. What other words would you use? That's such a simple, easy exercise. And I guarantee there are going to be adjectives. There's going to be revelations in that conversation that you're going to be able to use for your marketing campaigns, your email campaigns for months to come. So that's a very simple like hack of an exercise that I would implement to get started. But yeah, it's hard. I love niche schools. I love niche small. Like to me, that's where the opportunity is, because you don't have to deal. Oftentimes, you're not dealing with as much bureaucracy and as much like legacy. So I think startup colleges, schools that are just a few years out, have incredibly exciting opportunities, especially because they're not a lot of the silos that exist for most of us. hopefully don't exist quite yet for a school that's just starting out.
The taboo game, I love that. That's also good for your marketing team. Like when talking about your school, like eliminate these terms that you see on every single website and go for there. Question comes in.
Greg, one quick note, Greg, that I, just because you mentioned this about like students not necessarily starting on your homepage, oftentimes from an SEO standpoint, it's your program or major pages that are ranking well above your homepage. Because again, like your homepage is hopefully ranking for, Enrollify University when someone Googles that. But oftentimes, right, people's first point, like the way that they meet your brand is not through branded search, right? Like if they're already using your name in the query, they're way further along in like their journey to enrollment than folks that are, Googling, I want to become a chemical engineer. Where should I go to college or something like that, right? And so oftentimes schools spend very little time thinking about like their program and major pages and thinking about how they rank from an SEO standpoint. So to your point, like that's from all of our research, that's the gateway. People typically first interact with a college or university brand by Googling something that brings them to a program or major page, right? And so those pages in particular, you want a quick like SEO hack, find a way to ensure that those pages are optimized. Include forms on those pages, include a chatbot on a page like that, right? Like think about conversion opportunities on those particular pages, because 9 times out of 10, when it comes to general awareness and like the first touch point a new prospect has with your website, it's going to be on one of those pages. It's not going to be on your homepage.
That's funny. Let's take you inside baseball. The question I was about to ask came from Sherry. Can you give an example of language for a program page that would boost your SEO and ranking? So Zach answered the question before it was asked, which brings us to our poll. Take your time to fill that out. How awesome is that? Way awesome, or holy smokes, well awesome. So we'll give them 5 minutes on that. So that's a great answer to a very good question. Thank you for your question. I have another one coming in that's on this, so I figured I'd stay on this if that's okay with you, Zach.
Yeah.
If you're a part of a system that has one website for all, what's the best way to work towards the branding when they don't have control over something like the website?
Oh yeah, that's a tough one. If you're a part of a system that has one website for all, yeah. So what I think that there's a lot of opportunity to do here is find ways to, I know this is way easier said than done, collaborate with folks. What I would do in the spirit of SEO and the spirit, like why I think schools ultimately care about, I think for colleges and universities, they care a lot about SEO because there's more of a direct relationship between SEO and brand in higher ed than there is in like other industries. And what I mean by that is schools want to be known for things, right? Like, I mean, think about US News and World Report and how much like every college university touts, they have, the banner or the ribbon somewhere on their site. And it's like, we ranked number 28 for most friendly Southern schools in Georgia, or whatever, like, and people are like proud of that. And I think that what's behind that, like, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't want to, hate on US News and World Report rankings, but what's behind that is this idea to be, this desire rather, to be really known for something special. And I think SEO, like people want to come up, you want to come up for small, liberal arts school in Wisconsin with awesome, culture, or, dynamic experiential program learning opportunities for undergraduate students in New York. Like if you can win on terms like that, those are very, long tail niche term or long tail specific terms. But if you can win on that, that says something about your brand, right? That means that like you're doing enough, you're putting out enough content and it's resonating with enough people around that term that like you own the term of best, experiential learning opportunities in New York. Like that's something to be proud of. So what I would say to answer sort of both of these questions is if your school does not already have an SEO tool to understand what you're currently ranking for, you can spend a couple $100 to figure this out. Like I can send you a list of tools that I love that can help you do this, but oftentimes schools aren't even aware of the fact that, whoa, we're ranking for this term. Like who knew? Like, so if you don't know where you are ranking right now, it's going to be really hard to determine where you want to go. And so spend a couple $100 at some of these schools, or some of these tools cost rather, and at least get sort of like a baseline benchmark understanding of the terms and topics that you have some authority about.
And even before that, we at Mongoose tell clients and administrators this all the time: get in their shoes. What does a student see when they go to your website? If you have a video on your website, watch it without sound. And because a lot of people watch videos without sound, try and apply to your school as a student and see what pitfalls are there. Like, there's a very easy way to audit, and you don't even have to bring anyone in to do that, just to see the little things that you can do right off the bat and fix your brand today and make it more inclusive to everyone. The results are in 53%. Thanks, Zach. Holy smokes. Well, awesome. Thanks for voting on that. I want to get into a little bit of what I'm calling the digital buffet now, because people don't buy albums, they buy songs. People don't watch network TV from 8 to 10 and wait for Cheers to come on at 9. I'm dating myself with that reference. Everything's streamed. Everything's just so available. Schools have to adapt to that. I know Zach would agree with me on that. You have to adapt to the fact that students are just being able to treat the world like a digital buffet and like choosing their classes and things like that. Like, so for you, like, what can schools do to kind of not just dictate to students the status quo, but actually like leave themselves open to input for students?
Yeah, this is a great question. So, I think what's really, really important to remember here is, students at the end of the day, they want, I think, the balance between sort of like personalization, right, and like treating people sort of like so we talk a lot about like personas in higher ed, right, and the importance of like establishing sort of like persona audiences, persona groups to funnel your communications to, and then there's been all this conversation recently about like hyper personalized like communications down to the individual prospect. And I think like both are really important things to consider. But I actually think one of the things that we miss when we're communicating with students, especially when they're still prospects, is like they don't want it to just all be about them. Like college, and the college experience is about community, right? Like it is about joining something bigger than yourself. It's about coming into a new pool of people. For many people, it's like the first time they're actually in any sort of real diverse setting. And that's exciting. Like that's a momentous occasion. And I think that schools need to balance when it comes to your communications. Yes, tailor your preferences. Make sure that you're speaking to me in a way that, the channel that I want to be spoken to, the frequency at which I want to be spoken to, etc. But don't feel like you have to go over and above to speak to just Zach, at the risk of preventing any sort of vision for who Zach could become if he joins this community that you have established on your college or university. And I think that like when it comes to our messaging, it sometimes I'm seeing this more and more. Folks are going too far on the spectrum of like personal to sort of like institutional. I think folks are getting a little bit too far onto the one-to-one, like, and I don't mean one-to-one communications in terms of like, type of communication or channel or format of communication, but I mean like folks are trying so hard to track let's take every CTA button Zach has ever clicked and every image he has ever hovered over, and every social ad he's ever clicked on, and let's use all that information to make sure that we use the right word in this email that we're going to send him so that we increase his chance of actually matriculating. And like, again, there is a time and a place for leveraging this data, and it should be leveraged if you're not doing any of it already. But just remember too, right, this is still a very emotional decision. And at the end of the day, I'm a 17-year-old. I've never left home. If I'm seriously considering going to school halfway across the country, right, I really want to understand beyond the majors. Yes, that's important. Beyond the cost. Yes, that's important. I want to understand the community. Like, I want to understand how I'm going to feel when I'm on campus. And I think that we need to remember that in our approach to communications.
That's super interesting. And you can disagree with me if you want, but I think it goes back to what we said in the beginning. If you are being authentic and being honest, and you gain the trust of the students, which is the most important thing with brand as far as I'm concerned, you can do that. You can say, hey, trust us if this is the person you want to become, and this is what we've done for people in the past. I think that really kind of helps you take that position where you don't have to, take the, every single amount of input, and like have that student trust what their journey will be through you.
Yeah. And I mean, to answer your original question a little bit more directly to Greg.
I don't even
You
remember
know,
what the question was, to tell you the truth. So
around like modality and like flexible course offerings and hybrid offerings and whatnot. It's like right now, I think we're still living in this era of like flexibility is seen as sort of like a luxury. It's sort of like a value add, right? Like, but we're very quickly moving away from that. Like the expectation to your whole like buffet of options, right? Like the expectation is going to be that you are going to adapt your course offerings and the modality of those offerings around what works best for me. I was talking to on the road show. We sat down with some folks at SNHU, and obviously SNHU are, you know, they're doing a lot of really cool, innovative things in like the online education space. We actually went to their physical campus. I didn't even know they had a physical campus, but they were 100% online. Turns out they do have a physical campus with like 3,500 or 4K students enrolled in their in-person learning experience.
it wasn't just a bunch of servers stacked up. There was an actual campus.
Just like laptops and nobody there, signing on remotely. No, it was a real campus. And we're talking with folks there, and one of the things that they were talking about is like what they're trying to do is they're trying to build this model where if Zach wants to come to campus for a semester, stay in the dorms, have a social life, like, you know, play sports, he can do that for a semester. And then, you know, maybe Zach's life changes a little bit. Maybe like, you know, he decides, you know what, I want to try working and going to school. And in order to do that, like, I'm not going to be able to take like a full course load, and I'm not going to be able to afford to like live in the dorms. So Zach decides to move back home and, you know, take courses online and while he works, right? And then, you know, the next semester, he's like, you know what, I kind of miss campus. Like maybe what I'll do is I'll get an apartment and I won't live on campus. I won't have to pay tuition, or I won't have to pay, you know, for my dorm, for room and board, get my apartment off campus. But then I'll still come to campus a couple days a week for classes and then take the rest of my classes online, right? So that sounds totally crazy, like how we actually make that happen in higher ed right now. But that is the future, folks. Like that is going to happen. And the schools that figure out how to at least move in that direction the quickest, they're gonna be the ones that win. Because at the end of the day, like that's what's happening with work, right? Like again, I know in higher ed proper, a lot of folks are back on campus, but for many other people in the rest, I mean, you know, of course there are people that have returned to their offices, but for a lot of people, right? They're either in hybrid context or they're able to work fully remotely. Like this is fundamentally changing how we think, right, about our time. And we're naive to think that that won't trickle down to how students, right, who are 16, 17, you know, 18 years old today, think about how brands should cater to their preferences with respect to their time. And that's not going to stop with Amazon, right? Like it's going to make its way to higher ed too.
Yeah, I am a person that thrives by being in the office, but I'll tell you, during that year and a half we weren't allowed in the office, I loved naps with my dog when I had lunch break. So it's definitely something that you had some interesting thoughts about co-learning spaces, you know, how offices had that. Like, so I talk a little bit about like the idea of that actually taking hold in the future of higher ed.
Yeah, this is just an idea, and I'm sure there's other people that are more, you know, much smarter than I am that are talking about this and thinking about this. But like,
we don't have them on this webinar, so it has to be you to answer this. So.
When you think about like a co-working space, right? Like a WeWork, for instance, right? What's beautiful about a WeWork, and really, if you think about like the origin story of WeWork, what it was really about was helping people that were working on startups, helping like full-time creators to sort of simulate like the environment of being at a bigger company, being really actually at like a bigger startup, you know, without, you know, actually being a part of a bigger company or a bigger startup. And so like people would go, they'd have these memberships, they'd join a WeWork and you get access to coffee and juice and soda and beer on tap, right? Like all this fun stuff. You were around a bunch of people that were working. There was this incredible energy happening, right? And you either had a hot desk, maybe you paid a little bit more and had your private office, but you know, that's it. No, I think that COVID has changed a lot about this. I still think that co-working spaces I actually think co-working spaces are going to come back and be wildly used. But I think the same thing is going to could happen in higher ed. So as schools, and especially for non-traditional learners, like the degree completion audience, right? Grad school, 100%, this will be true. There will be folks that like desire to have sort of like a simulated on-campus experience, but they don't really want to move, from San Diego to New York. Like they want to go to NYU, but for this grad program, but they really don't want to move their family. And, they also don't want just like to sit in front of their computer for more hours a day and do online learning, right? So I think what will happen is you'll see co-learning spaces pop up, and these spaces, people will be going to different schools, right? Like they'll be designed as if they're like student centers or like mini college campuses, but everyone that's a part of the campus will actually be going to school at a different institution, right? So they'll be going to school online, but have that feeling like that they're actually a part of a college or university. Maybe there are even like faculty experts, like, or industry leaders that like take shifts at this co-learning space where you can go talk to somebody about sort of like the future of, biochemical engineering or something like that. Maybe they take up like a residency at one of these co-learning spaces, et cetera. Anyways, I'm going off now, but the point is, I think that I don't think that we're that far off from that happening, and some startup somewhere is probably already working on this.
Okay. Zach tends to go off, by the way. I want to do a little homework first and answer some questions. There is still time for you to get questions in on our Q&A thing. To answer one quick question, yes, the session's being recorded. So if you registered for this, you will receive an email with the recording after that. Someone had asked at the beginning about your findings for Enrollify when you went on your road trip. I know you had videos available at enrollify.org, but is there just a better way for, like, is that the ticket to follow you on that journey?
We've got videos. We've got videos, we've got podcasts to talk about it. We've got some written, more formal content too, in the forms of blog articles that you can kind of read and reference. And I'd be happy to send those links around after, if that would be helpful as well.
Cool.
But yeah, enrollify.org, you can find all of it.
And we'll have a little thing up on the screen when we're done here to get our contact information to get a hold of Zachary. Someone asked what SCO stands for. I think it's SEO was the question. I'm not wrong about that. Is there an SCO too? Or is it just
not that I'm aware of?
Okay, search engine optimization.
Search engine optimization.
That's basically the words on your website.
Yes,
search engine optimization.
It's how Google, it's how Google decides to rank content. We could talk all day about it. We should do a webinar. If you want to learn more about SEO, go to Enrollify, and there's tons of blogs and e-courses and podcasts on the topic as well.
Cool. Kayla asked this, and this might be a question that was answered, but just in case, if you can recommend one thing with high impact but low involvement, i.e. you don't have to get the administration and stakeholders and people involved to implement quickly, what would it be?
What's the goal? Is the goal to increase enrollment, increase inquiries, grow brand awareness? I'm going to assume the goal is to increase enrollment just for the purposes of...
I would do that. I'm not Kyla. If she wants to conflict that, she can type it in, but I would assume that's it.
Great. So I think the one thing that I would highly, highly, highly recommend schools think about right now, when you don't have a big team, you don't have lots of money, there's an app, and they're a startup. They're called Good Kind, and they are doing incredible work in the one-to-one video space, the one-to-one video messaging space. And schools that are using their tools, they're not sponsoring this, but schools that are using their tools right now are seeing really, really, really incredible engagement rates. And I think the future of how higher ed thinks about measuring enrollment ROI, it's going to be, and how that works its way up sort of up the funnel, it's going to be way more about engagement rates as opposed to just like open rates, click-through rates, right? Your impression to click rate, your click to, inquiry rate. Those sorts of things will still be measured, but what people are going to care way more about is the quality of that interaction. And I think one-to-one video is a really, really interesting way to measure the quality of the folks that are coming into your pipeline. Anyone can run a Facebook lead ad and get 500 inquiries. Like, that's not hard anymore, right? The question is, how many of those people are actually qualified? And lots of the people that I talk to, their data suggests that not many is the answer. So how do you focus more on engagement and the quality of every interaction that you have, as opposed to just focusing on the quantity game? And I think one-to-one video is a way to measure that.
What was the name of the company? I think your feed
Oh,
blurb
it's
as you
called,
said it.
the website is wearegoodkind.org. The name of the company is Goodkind. They just came out of Y Combinator, and they're a really interesting startup, and they're really trying to lean into the higher ed space. So if anyone wants an intro, I do know the folks over there. So I'd be happy to make that.
Yeah, and when they have a webinar, we'll make sure we talk a lot about Mongoose on their webinar. I'm just kidding. We're here to help. Yes, I don't mind helping, and if that helped anyone at all, that's our goal here today. One question came in, and yes, Kayla did say that was what she wanted to know about, so that's good.
Oh, good.
Hannah had a question, and I'm gonna totally hijack her question to make a segue, because I want to make sure that we do touch on this. And it's, how do we balance flexibility with personal connection with students? I would say there's a lot of answers to that question. I want to get Zach's info on that. But one thing, like a chat bot does that a lot. So I definitely want to, speaking of Mongoose, we do that sort of thing. That's a time saver. And there are ways to set up, conversational marketing at your school that helps. Zach and I will be doing a course, certification course on conversational marketing that I would be fired if I didn't plug, because we're super excited about that. So if you liked our conversation, I know that is coming down the pike, but that is one way to balance the personal connection with the time, because if you're answering question after question of repetitive questions, like, where do I go to get my, application and things like that. So that's a time saver, but I know that's not something that someone watching this webinar might have complete control over. So chatbot aside, and we can certainly get into that a little bit, how do we balance flexibility with personal connection?
Yeah, that is the $1 million question. And yeah, the short answer is that you really do need to be investing in tools. I love Mongoose, and I'm not here to just, they're doing incredible work. And whether it's Mongoose, whether it's somebody else, you really do need a chatbot, right? And you really do need texting incorporated into your flow. And this is, I would say maybe 3 or 4 years ago, this was still seen as a luxury good. Now this is like a need to have. There was a day and time in which the idea of a smartphone was 100% a luxury good, right? Now it's seemingly sort of all but a human right? And I think the same thing is true in sort of just how communications have evolved, right? My expectation when I go to a brand's website is to get an immediate answer to my question. And I think in the spirit of saving time and money, schools spend so much money on website redesigns and website rebrandings, and the frequency at which those are happening is just accelerating and moving up exponentially. And I'm all for a better website. I'm all for a prettier website. I'm all for, a website that has better searchability. And I think that's very important. But oftentimes it takes 2, 3, sometimes 4 years to get that website done. And by the time you've got it done, you kind of have to start working on, the next new website. I think that conversational marketing, just as a strategy for student recruitment, helps solve for a lot of those issues, right? If a student can't find what they're looking for in 8 seconds because you as a marketer, you as the admissions folk lost an argument with the faculty chair, and you have to organize content in the nav in a particular way because that's what Dr. So-and-so said was important, right? If you're losing that battle right now, a chatbot, right, can solve that problem. And I think that if you are really interested in saving yourself time, unfortunately, or I would say fortunately, but unfortunately in that it really is this simple. It's you really need to have conversational marketing tools at your disposal. So whether that's a chatbot, whether that's a sophisticated texting strategy, whether it's both, you need to be able to automate some of your workflow so that you can spend your time talking to the people that are most qualified in any given moment, right? The future of admissions, the future of enrollment marketing looks like you walking into your office, maybe it's your Zoom office, and being told in any given hour, these are the most important people for me to be talking to right now. That's where things are going. And conversational marketing strategies and other marketing strategies and tools help us get there. And I think that that's really important.
Yeah. And no matter what the tool is that you're using, it could be email, no matter what it is, You need to, put yourself in the shoes of the student. Personalization is key wherever you can personalize. That's very important to do. Get as much information as you can from your CRM or carrying over when you're talking to a student. Use that information in any communication you have with them whatsoever. More plugging, because it's fun to do on a webinar. I see Zach and Nicole. We have a new podcast with Enrollify that we wanted to plug real quick. Chat's what she said. Full disclosure, because you joined this webinar, I will tell you this. We probably weren't going to tell this story. I came up with that name as a joke. I had a list of names we wanted the podcast to be, and then a joke name, and it got chosen against my will, but it's going to be super fun. You want to talk a little bit about the podcast with Nicole?
Yeah, I'll just say we're super excited. This is going to be a monthly segment, part of the Enrollify podcast network. So if you aren't already subscribed to the Enrollify podcast, you can find it wherever you get your podcasts. And Nicole and I, actually the first episode drops tomorrow, which is super, super exciting. And these are really, really fun, dynamic conversations where we're wrestling with a lot of the same questions that you all are wrestling with. And so our hope is to use, this 45-ish minutes to tell some stories and give some practical tips and tricks for how to up your communications game, especially as it relates to Gen Z. So tune in, and it's going to be really, really, really fun. It'll be the last week of every month is when it'll publish on our podcast feed. So if you just hit follow or subscribe on the Enrollify podcast, you'll get updated.
It's a good way to organize your bill paying. When the podcast drops, get ready to pay your gas and water.
There you go.
Zach, I'm going to give you an opportunity to add anything you'd like to add, but I love conversations with you. They're super interesting. And I love today's conversation. Just in case you didn't get a chance to zip through the Q&A, or if you're watching this recorded and have a question for myself or Zach, but probably Zach, you can connect with us both on LinkedIn. This is the spelling of my name and Zach's name, Zach Busekrus and Greg Bauch. Shoot us an email as well. I love answering emails from people, whether it's just communication, email subject lines, questions to ask in texts and stuff like that. I'm a communicator. I love that kind of thing. And Zach is a font of information. That's all he has. So get a hold of Zach as well to ask any questions you might have of Zach. Anything you want to add to our conversations on what students want, Zach?
What I would just end with is, look, I, again, am privileged to talk to so many different people, and I understand that folks are oftentimes just in really tough situations, right? Budgets are tight. You don't have the teams that you need. Like, you're wearing 87 hats and your director comes and asks you to wear an 88. Like, that's really, really, really hard. And so what I like to say to folks is, like, over the next month, think about the next 30 days. What's one thing that you could go and do deeply, right, that has the potential at moving the needle in some direction, even 10 to 15%, right? Go and do that one thing, whether it's like, you know what, we just talked a lot about SEO. I have zero idea what my school ranks for. Give yourself the next 30 days to go sign up for a tool, get a free trial, even cancel the free trial of like SEMrush or Moz SEO after 30 days, right? If you don't want to pay for it, go run your domain through one of these tools and just become aware and acquainted with, like, whoa, these are the terms and topics that we're winning on right now. Like, find one thing to do, but then go deeply on it. Like, don't go read like 10 different articles on how to up my Facebook game, what I should be doing on Instagram right now. Should I be on TikTok? Oh, also, like, what is this SEO thing? Like, you don't have the time or the luxury to sort of be scatterbrained there. Like, find one thing for the next 30 days that you want to go a little bit deeper on and go to school on it, right? And then as you're going to school on it, think, what could I do in light of what I'm learning to help move the needle in some way, whether that's engagement rates on email, whether that's increases to particular program pages from organic traffic, whether that's an increase in inquiries, whatever it might be, right? What can I do to move that needle 10 to 15%, right? Start there, just start there. And I promise you, if you do that well, right, you're gonna start seeing changes. And then it really will just give you sort of the encouragement and really the authority to help inspire other people on your team to do the same. So start small, go deep, don't go wide with this stuff. Really, really, really go deep before you consider going wide.
Love it. I call it towels. When I've been home all day and my wife's out and she comes home and I've done nothing all day and I've got like an hour before she gets home, I throw in a load of towels because it's super easy to wash and dry and put them. I did the towels. That's the 10 to 15% of what I had to do today. I did the towels. So do your towels, I guess. Zach and I are super lucky to work with higher ed folks because you all are the best and you are going through a lot. So hopefully this webinar did help you out somewhat. And again, reach out to us with any questions. But I really want to thank everyone for joining us today. And especially Zach, thank you for sitting down and having this conversation with me today.
Of course, thanks for the invite. Thanks everyone for giving us an hour of your time. Hopefully it was at least somewhat helpful, and would love to connect with you all further, but keep doing what you're doing. You guys are awesome and you're change makers. Keep it up. Keep up the hard work. We're here to help in whatever way we can.
All right. Thanks, Zach. On behalf of Mongoose, I'm Greg Bauch, and thank you very much. I hope you all enjoy your day.